sometimes something happens on Twitter and it gets me very excited. And this happened about 28 minutes ago. Eric Engels of Sportsnet fame tweets.
Don't know if I've ever heard of him.
Oh, I know. He tweets a few thoughts. ... Right then, Eric Engels tweeter is about to be lit.
Are they wild thoughts?
They are wild. No, they're about the Canadiens, not the Wild. Jesse, how dare you?
Okay, so what do we got?
Well, I don't know. I figured maybe I'd let him tell us.
Eric, are you driving right now?
I'm not.
You're not.
I just got home. I had to pick up some gas, maybe a little golf in the offing later in the afternoon.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So Eric, I'm
a hockey guy.
I'm gonna let you take this one. So you have to start this segment with a few thoughts, and you have to physically say it. Okay? So you ready?
I guess instead of reading them off, which I'm not going to do, I'll just repeat myself for the sake of this audience. That I think Andrei Markov. It's being reported that he's looking for 2 years. It's not a secret. It's a poorly kept one if it is one, and he's representing himself. He was linked with agent Sergei Bergevin, a former player and good friend of him, who I think, for whatever reason, is decertified now. So, Markov has been at $5.75 million for a long time. He's been in Montreal for a long time, signing 2- and 3-year deals, respectively, and there's never been much of a threat of him leaving, and I don't anticipate that he would, but he's asking for a 2-year deal on a team where the left side of their defense has been altered dramatically over the last couple of weeks. No more Mikhail Sergachev, no more Nathan Bolya. Obviously Alexei Emelin taken in the expansion draft. David Schlemko is in now, but it's been there. They signed Jacob Jarabek out of the KHL, a Czech defenseman who they have hopes will be in the NHL next year, but no guarantees. So there's a lot of leverage on Markov's side of this. There's a lot more risk on Bergevin's side of it because, 2 years with a 38-year-old defenseman, anything can happen, and there's the recapture issue. So, that's all. That didn't get into 140 characters, but I'm giving you what I think on the Markov front. And on the Radulov front, obviously we know some teams are interested in him. It wouldn't be a secret he's the marquee forward on the free agent market. I think, with the window open and free agents being able to speak to other teams, it certainly gives Radulov a sense of what his market value is, and that most likely plays better into his favor to return for Montreal and looking for a 5-year deal probably than it does for the Canadiens, who would like to max out at a 4-year deal. So I still think it's the likeliest destination for him to end up in Montreal, but there's some negotiation to go here, provided a deal hasn't already been signed that I'm unaware of.
Eric, is Andrei Markov worth? Was it 2 years, $12 million? That was the
6 per.
6. Is he worth that?
I mean, is he worth that on the open market? Is he worth that to the Canadiens? I think you could argue that he's worth that in both circumstances. At 38 years old, what he provided last season was tremendous. Moved up to a pair with Shea Weber. They were formidable together. He probably, even though they only went 6 games in the playoffs, played one of the best playoff series I've seen him play since being in Montreal, and didn't show much signs of regress. I will say this. There was a period during the season where he missed, I want to say it was 3 weeks or so, something close to that towards the end, and obviously you don't want to be out with an injury, but it got him some much-needed rest ahead of the playoff season, which we've seen in the past. He's kind of dissipated as things moved along. So, yeah, is he worth it? He's a great defenseman who hasn't changed much in terms of his ability to move the puck efficiently and defend efficiently. And so long as that's the case, he's got a strong case to make what he's after.
Now, I'm just looking at capfriendly.com and looking at the Canadian situation. They got $21 million in cap space, which kind of seems like a lot. But again, like you said, they got to re-sign Markov. There's still the Galchenyuk question. Radulov is a huge question. But then I look to next year, and Carey Price is an unrestricted free agent. Is Montreal's concern with their, as it pertains to the cap, more related to next season than this one?
Of course, yeah. It's it's pretty obvious. You broke it down perfectly there, Steve. And Carey Price is going to take up a huge piece of the pie and for a very long time if he's going to stay in Montreal. And we'll see how quickly Marc Bergevin can get that done. He said that it's priority number one, and he believes there's a good chance he can get it done early in the summer. And From everything we've heard from Price, there's belief that he wants to return. So I think there's a match there. And when you talk about that $21 million right now, say you give 6 to Markov and another 6 to Radulov, and then you have a Galchenyuk negotiation as well looming. It amounts to not that much, and they still have holes on this team to fill, as Marc Bergevin admitted going into the draft. So it's a complicated situation, and I can't wait to see how Bergevin is going to deal with it.
Do you think Marc Bergevin has complicated this situation more than it needed to be with the amount, not just the amount, but the types of moves that he's made? Like, clearly he was going to have problems on defense, was making the Jonathan Drouin deal for Sergachev. And maybe Sergachev was the only piece that Tampa Bay would take back. Was that perhaps the smartest move to make at that time? Because in solving one problem, you create another.
I mean, I think you look at every general manager. If you want to look at Jim Rutherford as a perfect example of having problems and solving them on the fly, I mean, that's what you have to do in today's NHL. There's no choice. The constraints of the salary cap pitch you into a corner. There's a fixed amount of money you can spend. And ultimately, when you have the opportunity to acquire a player that you know is going to help you down the line and certainly immediately in Jonathan Drouin, you don't miss out on that opportunity. Mm-hmm. Some people might suggest they made a mistake letting Nathan Beaulieu go for a third-round draft choice. In their view, they were going to lose him in expansion no matter what. They had to get something for him, and his value was obviously hurt by the fact that he was a healthy scratch and with Montreal facing elimination and hadn't realized his potential in the 5 years that he was with the team. So, you can argue anything in hindsight. I think he's a general manager among 31 that have similar issues to deal with from a year-to-year basis in this salary cap world.
So maybe this is a strange way of looking at it, but so the Canadiens, they figure they're going to lose Nathan Beaulieu for nothing, so they trade him for a pick. They end up losing Emelin, who does hurt their defensive situation, but at least his cap hit comes off the books, and then they replace a little hole in the lineup with Schlemko, who is much cheaper than Emelin. Do you think Bergevin was, I don't want to say happy to lose Emelin, but do you think that was his goal, to come out of the expansion draft losing either Emelin or maybe Thomas Buchanan?
I mean, I think he was prepared for any scenario, and it would be foolish not to think that he had some sort of preferences. He needed money available for the potential deals he's got to sign with Markov and Radulov and Galchenyuk and Price. So, everything is cost benefit. There's a win and a loss in every transaction that happens for each team. I don't mean to speak so generally. Just to shift things over for a second here, looking at Radulov and Markov specifically, you look at the free agency crop. If Bergevin is not willing to pay those two guys, who is he willing to pay? That to me is the real question ahead of unrestricted free agency, which is just a few days away. And that's where things really get interesting here. And that's why I believe that Radulov and Markov are likely to stay put. But it's obviously been a down-to-the-wire, difficult negotiation in both cases.
Help me out. What's the center depth of the Montreal Canadiens? Like, I know Shaw.
The laugh isn't a good sign.
That's not good. I know Buchanan is a center. Andreas Martinson, I know, is a center. Philippe Deneau, is he a full-time center?
Yeah, Phil Deneau is definitely in the middle. Thomas Buchanan is in the middle. Charles Huston has the potential to play in the middle. Mike McCarron is in the middle. And then, you have some maybes. You have Galchenyuk, who's still a maybe no matter what they've continued to say about him, and whether or not he stays in Montreal is anything but a sure thing at this point. But it's still a possibility. So, and as far as Jonathan Drouin is concerned, and this is just my opinion and nothing I've heard and nobody I've spoke to and nothing confirmed.
I can't wait to make this into a Sportsnet article.
I really, truly believe that Jonathan Drouin has a game that's very well suited to playing in the middle of the ice. And I think the Canadiens were enticed by that possibility. And I think I'd be absolutely shocked if they weren't at least going to try it. They're managing expectations. Marc Bergevin ahead of the draft said very clearly that he's not going to put that pressure on Drouin of becoming a number one center right off the hop with the Canadiens. But I really think they have to try. And I see a player that absolutely makes players around him better. That was the real value in the Drouin acquisition, whether he plays wing or center. He makes players around him better, and the Canadiens did not have enough of those players, and Radulov's one of them too. So I think Drouin's a possibility, and if that answers your question, Steve, that's how I see the middle of the ice for the Canadiens.
Galchenyuk, what do you think will happen there, Eric?
I think a lot of it's contingent on Radulov. I don't think the Canadiens can afford to lose Galchenyuk as a scoring winger if Radulov moves on to unrestricted free agency. There are not that many options on the market that are suitable in order to replace the type of offense both Galchenyuk and Radulov can bring to the Canadiens. So I think there's a holding pattern there. I think they tried very hard, actually, to move him over the last couple of weeks, and their price was extremely high, looking for a top four defenseman and looking for a center, and not really backing off that price, and no reason to do so with a 23-year-old who's probably going to be under market value on his next contract. So the future for Alex Galchenyuk is uncertain in Montreal. If he does stay, some changes are going to happen on a personal front and obviously on a professional front. But I would honestly put that dossier at 50-50 right now.
Wow.
It's June 27th. Can Montreal, if the fate of Alex Galchenyuk depends on Alex Radulov, can they afford to wait? Or do you think a decision's coming in the next, 3-4 days?
Well, I'd say if we get to July 1st and Radulov is still available, it's almost a fait accompli. He won't be with the Canadiens. You probably have 10 or 11 teams that have expressed interest. You talk about Montreal having $21 million in cap space. I look at the New York Rangers, who have the same, and they were high on Radulov before he came back to the NHL. I would find it very hard to believe that they could get to July 1st and Radulov wouldn't be re-signed, or get to July 1st and have the opportunity to continue to sign him.
So with that in mind, if they do re-sign him, let's say right after this show's done, which normally happens, the major issue that we've talked about gets resolved, and it's completely out of date.
Eric from breaking a trade now.
Eric, tell me what happens if Radulov signs. He signs for, I would imagine, what, six, so 5 years, $30 million. If it's his perfect world, if it's Montreal, then it's 25 over 4. But what, for you, happens to Galchenyuk in that particular situation? Do you hang on to a guy like that? Or do you see, there's been that Matt Duchene thing that's been thrown out. What do you think is the most likely scenario?
You know what, Adam? It's so hard to answer because there's just so many balls in the air. But assuming Radulov signs, I think the Canadiens continue to look for the trade that brings back a couple pieces to Montreal with Galchenyuk involved. And I think there's some Canadiens fans that are very leery about that, and I'm happy to go on record to say right now, no matter what happens, no matter where he plays, I think Alex Galchenyuk will be really good next year. There's so much that his name has been bandied about, and so much pressure on him to succeed, and he has too much talent not to. The question is, will it be in Montreal or elsewhere? And I honestly, I would not give it more than a 50% chance that he's staying, assuming Radulov is signed in Montreal. So that's purely my opinion, and based on obviously all the conversations I've had in the last couple of weeks and how actively Montreal was trying to move it.
Well, that's why we're having you on. We want your opinion. It's an informed opinion.
What's Carey Price getting? 10?
Great question. The biggest question in Montreal, and I don't think 10's out of the question. I think Carey Price needs to see what's going to happen with this team. If bodies start flying out the door, which is a possibility at this stage, what is his incentive to take a discount? They've been talking about him as the best player in the world for the last 3 years. They've been depending on him to be the best player in the world. He's a guy who's from a very remote area and had a major life adjustment to come to Montreal. His life here is not easy. His life here on an 8-year deal, going towards the latter half of the deal, will not be easy when maybe he's a smidgen less than the Carey Price we know. So it's very hard to pin down the value, Steve. I look at what Ben Bishop signed for and think to myself, maybe there is the opportunity that could be less than 10, because no matter how good Carey Price is and no matter how much better he is than Ben Bishop, is he worth double? is a good question to be asking. If he gets done at somewhere between 8.5 and 9.5, I think that's a really good deal for the Canadiens and for him, obviously contingent on the idea that he continues to have to be the best player in the world, and they depend on him to be that.
Will Carey Price make more money than Connor McDavid?
No.
No, not even close.
Because there's a lot of people out of Edmonton swearing up and down that Connor McDavid's going to take some sort of $8 million, $8.5
and then
thing.
The other rumor was he's going to make 14.
Well, he should, but he won't. I mean, he can ask that.
Do you think there's any inkling in Carey Price's or anyone else on the Canadiens' head that taking less is just good for you if you want to win? Like Crosby could have taken more than 8.7, but he wanted to win, and look at him. He's won 3 cups. Is there any of that in Carey Price? Or, I mean, he's 29, he's about to turn 30. Do you think he just wants a payday?
I mean, I think every player has to have that in the back of their head, but at the same time, there are things that need to happen in Montreal before Carey Price puts his name on a contract. And like I said, if he sees, bodies flying out the door and doesn't see the opportunity to win over the next 4 years, let alone the back half 4 years, what is the incentive there to sign for less? I don't see it. So, I mean, although I admit every player has to think that way, especially the star players, ultimately they have to take care of themselves and their families and their best interests.
So we've hammered away on the most popular topics with the Canadiens and names that always come up. What aren't we talking about that we should? When it comes to Montreal, that is.
I just answer the questions. I don't ask them. I do ask them, for a living. But yeah, I mean, I think we're covering all the ground that everybody's concerned about here. The other side of it is this is a forward group in Montreal that has not produced to the level that they need to. I don't think Marc Bergevin has done tinkering in any part of this lineup. So it makes for a very compelling summer moving forward. There's a lot that could happen between now and September, and they have to hope that some of the prospects in the system start to elevate and that they do a better job on the development front. That's a big topic of conversation. You see a bunch of former first rounders out the door. You start to think about what's going on the development side. You see the American Hockey League club miss the playoffs for 5 straight years and finally make it, and then they lose in the first round in a sweep. And there's no changes potentially coming with the coaching staff. There's got to be an indictment of those types of decisions, and I think the fans are well ahead of the curve on that front, and we'll see how much it comes up in conversation with Bergevin and his press conferences, because right now you look at the prospect cover, and I'll remember the season-ending press conference where Arpon Basu said, you guys are talking about Galchenyuk as a winger. Is there a viable option in the system that you could see coming up and playing center on this team? And he said no. So, there's a lot of things to do on the development side and a lot of things to do on the player acquisition side to make this team competitive with the Leafs, with the Oilers, with the Sabres moving forward, with the Senators and their prospect pool, with Philadelphia, who's nobody is talking about, but has a tremendous prospect pool, with Carolina very much in the same boat. You have teams that you can see moving forward over the next 5 years are going to be extremely competitive, and the Canadiens need more than Carey Price, Shea Weber, and Jonathan Drouin to keep pace.
Yeah, I won't keep you too much longer, but help me out. Stéphane Lefebvre is the coach down there, right, in the AHL?
Correct.
Who's in charge of that team? I know Bergevin is the head honcho of everything, but who is the GM of that AHL team?
Larry Carriere, who's the assistant general manager in Montreal, takes care of most, if not everything, that goes on with the American Hockey League affiliate, and obviously Bergevin oversees everything.
So it's a pretty underrated complaint that I hear from Habs fans, but I hear it from them enough. Like, what has to happen for there to be a change at the development level? Because, like you said, it's clearly a problem.
It's a 50-50 problem. It comes down to it. The players too have to take responsibility. You know, it's not as though they've drafted duds. They've drafted good players. And on the development front, outside of the AHL coaching staff, Marty Lapointe is excellent. You know, like the way he takes care of the players and what he does for them and how he pushes them to be professionals, not just professional hockey players, but in the way they conduct themselves. You know, speaking to certain players that he's brought along, like Mike McCarron, they rave about him and how on the ball he is and how in touch he is and how often he travels to see them and talks to them and deals with them. And I've had a number of conversations with him where I've come away nothing short of impressed. So, you know, it's not all on the Canadiens. Some of these players have to take matters into their own hands and be the authors of their futures. And, you know, these are issues that go on across the league with every team. The Canadiens certainly have them and have to deal with them and have to have an active plan in dealing with them. I truly believe a change at the American Hockey League level, as far as the coaching staff is concerned, is in order. But, you know, I'm not Mark Bergevin. Don't make that decision.
This is completely off of the topic that you're normally asked about, Eric, but I do want to get your thoughts on George McPhee's handling of the Vegas draft, and I'm not talking about like the entry draft, because obviously, you know, I think they came away pretty well from that. But the expansion draft itself, were you surprised by some of the picks? Did he pick the way that you thought he would? How do you look at that situation?
You know what? Outside of the actual picks they made for the team, the way George McPhee handled that situation, the way he wielded power, there were certainly some curveballs in there that weren't anticipated, despite a year of speculating what Vegas might do at the expansion draft. And I thought it was exceptionally handled by George McPhee. It really, and the team that he's assembled there, with a guy like Von Karpen, who's an incredible professional recruiter, they really did a great job maximizing their power in that situation, from getting teams not to deal with each other if it would affect the deal they had with Vegas. That was a kind of a big shocker, but a real, for lack of better terms, a real mafioso way of dealing with things. And I thought it was brilliant, you know, and I think, you know, you speak to the general manager, I've spoken to a few of them who were in awe of the way he manipulated that situation. And they're going to be competitive, but not too competitive that they won't have high draft position. They have high draft position guaranteed, but they have an opportunity to draft so many players into their organization over the next 3-4 years that they're going to be a Stanley Cup contender in the near future. And that's such an exciting prospect for a team that needs to succeed right off the hop. And, you know, people could talk about it being ridiculous and it's too much. Ultimately, they paid $1 billion to get into the league, to have a franchise and $500 million distributed in the NHL. And, you know, this is one of the things that I think the NHL got right.
Do you think with contracts like Emelin, like Spiza, things that they've had a harder time moving, do you think, did those sorts of picks surprise you, or did you expect him to go for players, I guess, of that sort? Because there were some board picks that nobody would have probably expected.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the return on Mark Method to Dallas, I don't think it's anything exceptional, but at the end of the day, if Vegas is going to continue to pick up futures, regardless of where they slot in the NHL entry draft, they've done a good job acquiring these players to the expansion draft that they could move for future potential. And I'm in awe of the work that George McPhee did, and I'm excited to see what he's going to do moving forward, because the opportunity is tremendous.
Great. All right.
That's as glowing a review as I've heard.
Yeah, I think I think 3 years from now they are going to start to be, I mean, maybe even sooner, because we thought the Leafs were going to be terrifying a couple of years from now.
Do we really care what their roster looks like next year? I mean, I don't think they do. You know, they obviously want a team that's going to put some people in the seats and draw attention and know that they'll be competitive in games, which I think they've accomplished no matter who they move between now and September 1. But the potential in the future is enormous, and I don't see how anybody could be looking at George McPhee and saying, wow, he really screwed this up. No. He clearly didn't.
No. Oh, and when those prospects come to fruition, when
Brendan Leipzig wins the Art Ross.
That's right.
I'm going to be so sad.
And Emelin wins the Norris. Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show and making time for us. We really, really appreciate it. And it's honestly, Montreal is just such a fascinating team, and they have been for
with great journalists.
3 years. With fantastic journalists.
One final question, Eric.
I'll let you ask it, but I just want to tell you I loved I love coming on, and I think you guys are doing a great job, and I love the podcast. So I'm happy to do it anytime you guys want me.
Darling.
Wow. That just made my whole day, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just curious.
Go ahead, Jesse. Ruin the moment.
Do you own a fidget spinner?
Interview ruined. He's never coming back. Steve just left the room.
I don't. I don't, and I don't think I'll be acquiring one in the near future.
If we gave you one that had a Montreal Canadiens logo plastered all over it, would you consider it?
I would consider giving it to somebody who's a fan of the Montreal Canadiens.
Okay. Wow. Spoken like a true journalist. Hey, Eric.
Hey, listen, I grew up a fan of the Montreal Canadiens, but we've crossed certain lines that can no longer consider myself that.
There you go.
There you go.
Eric, thanks so much for your time, and we will be having you on again in the near future. Maybe even next week we'll be bugging you, because I think Montreal's roster will look very... It'll be very, very interesting to see how this materializes.
Everything you said last week was wrong.
I thought there would be more yelling in this interview.
Well, I mean, if you came in, I think that would be a little bit different.
Nobody fed Dangle a coffee this morning, or
he's halfway through his.
Yeah, I'm only halfway through. Yeah, definitely if you were in studio, I'd be like, you know what? Screw Radulov and all that. We need to talk about PK Subban being traded for Shea Weber for the next 2 hours. I hope you're ready. Buckle up.
I can't believe we didn't go there.
Well, yeah.
Well, now that you mention
it. Next time.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, next time you're in town, please make sure to look us up. Come on into the studio, because we'd love to talk to you in person.
Okay, take care.
All right, thanks, Eric.
See ya.
Interesting, that Montreal team.
I tone it down for interviews because I think I scare people, okay?
Yeah. Well, I remember